street! Across the street! Thank you!
Well, that feels good, doesn't it?
Of course, the brilliance of Occupy Wall Street, and you got to keep it that way, because they don't know how to deal with that. They can't fucking break it. They don't know how to break it. You know, they don't know how to take it out. Because every time they take one of you out, there's 10 more. And essentially, we talk about now American culture. I don't think that's correct. It's not American culture. It's corporate culture. And it got infused into our heads, courtesy of the most sophisticated propaganda effort, of mass propaganda effort ever created in human history. And it's no accident that Goebbels, when he built the Nazi propaganda machine, carried around a copy of Edward Bernay's 1922 book Propaganda. And this machine began to work for the most retrograde forces in American society. Now, the reason that popular and progressive movements like this one are vital for a democracy is that in a traditional democracy, the liberal class is the middle. It's never meant to be the left. And if any of you have read Chomsky, especially Manufacturing Consent, you understand the role of the liberal class is to set the parameters within the mainstream by which debate is possible. And every time you step outside of those parameters, like my close friend Ralph Nader, you become a pariah. Now, the function of a liberal class is to make incremental or piecemeal reform possible within the system, a kind of safety valve. That when you destroy the liberal institutions, what you're really doing is destroying that mechanism by which piecemeal or incremental reform is possible. And it's fascinating that this was one of the obsessions of Dostoevsky. If you look at his novel Demons or Notes from Underground, and Dostoevsky understood, and he actually wrote this, that when these liberal mechanisms of reform no longer work, you enter what he calls an age of moral nihilism. When you have a choice in life between two sets of principles, power and privilege, or justice and truth, and you have to make a choice. And if your fealty and loyalty is to justice and truth, the more you compromise with those whose loyalty is to power and privilege, the more you diminish the capacity for justice and truth. And the great exemplar of that is Martin Luther King. By 1968, at least until he was killed in April, King is the most powerful political figure in the United States because when he went to Memphis, 50,000 people went with him. And when Martin Luther King got up at Riverside Church on April 4th in 1967 and denounced the Vietnam War, Lyndon Johnson took away the 4 plainclothes FBI agents who provided his security, and both King and Johnson knew what that meant. All of the true correctives to American democracy came through movements that never achieved formal political power. The anti-slavery movement, the suffragists who fought for women's rights, the labor movement, the civil rights movement. None of them achieved political power because they understood, as Karl Popper wrote in The Open Society and Its Enemies, the question is not how do you get good people to rule. That's the wrong question. Popper writes that most people attracted to power are at best mediocre, which is Obama, or venal, which is Bush. The question is how do you make the powerful afraid of you? And that's what you're doing now. The last liberal president we had in the United States was Richard Nixon. It was Richard Nixon. Not because he was a liberal, because he was still scared of those movements. Mine and Safety Act, OSHA. I had dinner down in Charleston, West Virginia, with a guy named Ken Heckler, maybe the last honest public servant in America, living in a 2-room apartment. He was a congressperson, and Heckler was a fighter for the miners. And while Nixon was in office, he was pushing through the black lung bill, by which miners who have black lung, every miner who spends any time in the mines with black lung, would get benefits, which the companies were denying them. And Nixon didn't want to sign it, and Heckler held a press conference, and he said, well, let me tell the president this. If he doesn't sign that bill tonight, every single mine in this country will shut down. And Heckler said, I had no idea whether they were going to shut down or not. But little Richard Nixon got out his pen and he signed it as fast as he could. That's how power works. And you don't want to compromise with power ever. It's not our job to take power. That's not our job. It's our job to rebuild the radical movements that keep this country honest. The secret is a constant antagonism to power, even when power looks good. You know, and you got Charlie Rangel coming down here. Charlie Rangel ran the Ways and Means, but he wrote the goddamn tax code that screwed us. People are going to try and suck onto your movement because you guys have an integrity and a passion and a truth and that they're going to try and co-opt. And that's your biggest danger. And every time you get sort of wobbly, pull out Mother Jones or Randolph Bourne or the great Jane Addams, and read them. And they'll keep you whole. Pull out King's letter in a Birmingham jail. King talks about white moderates telling him to go slow. Both Malcolm X and King probably have some of the best critiques of the liberal class. So we destroyed our liberal institutions, we destroyed public education, and we saw a rise of these mutant political figures like Bill Clinton. Clinton, which speaks in that feel your pain language, is particularly, for me, insidious because he does what these liberal groups, these faux liberal groups do. He speaks in the traditional language of liberalism, caring about the working class and the poor, and yet passes through one piece after legislation after another, starting with NAFTA, which was the biggest betrayal of the working class in this country since the Taft-Hartley Act in 1948. He deregulates the FCC so the fascist organization Clear Channel can control all our radio stations. Viacom, General Electric, Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, Disney, they got their hands on about 90% of almost everything most Americans see, watch, read, or hear. He destroys welfare, and one of the reasons they keep extending unemployment benefits is because, courtesy of Bill Clinton, once you go on welfare, you only get $143 a month. They cut Section 8, they destroyed the banking system. They tore down that firewall between commercial and investment banks and turned the whole damn banking system over to hedge fund managers. And never forget that speculators in the 17th century, speculation in the 17th century was a crime. Speculators were hung. And today, they run the political system and the government. And so that fake liberalism, and it was done on purpose. Clinton understood that if he did the bidding of corporations, he'd get corporate money, so that by the 1990s, the Democratic Party had fundraising parity with the Republicans, and by the time Barack Obama ran for president, he got more. Now, Wall Street's turning on Obama. You know why? Because they don't need him anymore. In 2008, they were shitting in their pants. They thought this was going to happen. They knew better than you or I how utterly corrupt and criminal and game the system was, and they thought we were coming for them, but we didn't. And so they pushed Obama forward as a brand. Obama functioned as a brand. In the same way that people of color and HIV-positive models functioned as a brand for Benetton and Calvin Klein on their billboards a few years ago, so that you would associate their products with a risque lifestyle and progressive politics. But the consequence of a brand is always to make passive consumers confuse a brand with an experience. This is an experience. The political narrative spun out for you by the public relations industry is fantasy. And that's why Advertising Age, after Obama is elected, gives the Obama campaign its top annual award, which is Marketer of the Year. He beat Nike, Apple, Zappos, because the professionals know exactly what he'd done. And so what happens is that safety valve shut. Real unemployment between 17 and 20% when you count people who've stopped looking for work or people who have poorly paid part-time jobs and want full-time employment. The average worker at Walmart works 28 hours a week And that puts them below the poverty line. And of course, the first thing the Walton family does when they sign up a new employee is give an application for food stamps so we can subsidize the Waltons. That's really what the taxpayer is doing. What happens when these guys evaporate $17 billion in national wealth, $40 billion in worldwide wealth? They loot the U.S. Treasury, and watch that banking crisis in Europe. Those banks are teetering. Spain, Greece, Italy, Portugal. And if they go under, you can be sure these guys are going to go back for more. And there is now no way within the system to stop them. There is no way you can pass any piece of legislation unless it's written by corporate lobbyists, which is Obamacare, 2,000 pages, all of it written by the pharmaceutical and insurance industry. It ends up being the equivalent of the bank bailout bill, $400 billion in subsidies for these industries, and of course they made sure that they destroyed the public option. Because if you look at an analysis that's done out of Harvard by Physicians for a National Health Plan, if we had national health care, we wouldn't be spending 40 cents on every dollar into corporate profits. We'd have we have the least efficient, most costly healthcare system in the industrialized world. And I've lived in Canada, I've lived in Switzerland, I've lived in France, I've lived in Britain, I've seen how it's supposed to work. But these guys have blocked it out, and the latest is that they've got the White House, the Obama White House, to give them exemptions so they don't have to insure chronically ill children. And what that really means in moral terms is that we live in a country where corporations are permitted to hold sick children hostage while their parents bankrupt themselves trying to save their sons or daughters. That exposes the moral rot that we face. And so what is the response? This is the response. This is it. This is the only hope we have left, because corporations turn everything into a commodity that they exploit until exhaustion or collapse human beings, human capital, and the ecosystem. And that's why the environmental crisis is intimately twinned with the economic crisis, because the only word these corporations and the psychopaths who run them know is more profit. And they haven't figured out that they're going to go down with the rest of us. They're too isolated, too myopic, too idiotic. And what you're doing today, and what everybody has been doing here since September 17th, and what is happening throughout this country, is literally a fight for life, because we don't have much time left. We have watched the Obama administration shred Kyoto, and we are fed equally self-deluded visions. One is, of course, like 50 new members of Congress that came in and said global warming doesn't exist. The other is that we can adapt. We can all plant palm trees in Chicago as if it's going to stop there. If we don't break the back of the fossil fuel industry very, very swiftly, then my children and your children and their children's children are going to live in a hell on earth. So let me just close by saying, hold fast to the moral imperative that keeps you grounded. Don't compromise over that moral imperative. There are all sorts of forces that are going to come out and pretend to be your friend, but they're not. Hold fast to that radical message, and every time you waver, pick up the great radicals of the past: Dorothy Day, King, Malcolm X, Randolph Bourne, they're all there, Mother Jones, because those are the true ancestors of your movement. Those are the saints of this movement. They marched that path before, the one you're marching now, and God bless you all.